This first slide you're going to see is an important diagram. Let me explain it to you. What you have is several boxes, 3 boxes, one in the left, one in the middle, and one on the right. This is known as the information processing model. The center box, the large box that's shaped like a rectangle, is basically what happens inside your brain that we cannot directly observe. On the left-hand side is the idea that we have a lot of information or a lot of stimuli being presented to us at any one time through our 5 senses. We have lights, sounds, touch, smells, and tastes being presented to us. In order to actually process one of those or one or more of those stimuli more deeply, we need to pay attention. So attention is the central construct of the information processing model. As we have a lot of stimuli in our environment, we attend to one of those things or more. When we attend to something, it moves into what's called the middle box or the rectangle. It moves into the brain, or that's where we perceive it and we interpret what that means. The receptors are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactual, olfactory, and gustatory. You should know what all of those mean. If you're not sure, olfactory means smelling and gustatory means tasting. For movement, the 2 we used primarily are visual and kinesthetic. Somewhere in our brain we receive the information and we perceive it. We know what perception is from chapter 6, so we interpret. Then our central nervous system formulates a motor program by combining what we perceived with what we have stored in memory. So some of the things that are going on are in blue with the arrow going into the large rectangle. In order to formulate a motor program, we have to use our memory. Processing speed is important, how fast we process the information, and then we program or we make a plan. Once we've made a plan to respond to the stimulus, then we perform that motor program, and that's called the motor response or the output. For example, if you're playing softball and you're up to bat, you perceive a lot of things that are going on. You have many things in your line of sight that you can see. You may be able to smell things like hot dogs, but the things that are important are the ball coming towards you. So you perceive the ball, you attend to that stimulus, that specific thing, the ball, and then you perceive it with your receptors, and then quickly you formulate a motor program or a plan for movement based on your memory and your past experience, and then you tell your muscles to execute the response, which hopefully is to swing and hit the ball at the right time in the right place. Attention is really the core of the information processing model. It is prerequisite to the perception of information. If we're not attending to something, we're not going to perceive it. There are a couple ideas related to attention. One is that our attention is limited, which means we can only attend to one thing at a time. When it seems like we're multitasking, we're actually switching our attention back and forth between many different things. Another idea is that our attention is serial. We attend to one thing and then another. That's how we seem to multitask. We pay attention to one thing, then another, then another, then another, and we can do that very quickly. Some concepts associated with attention and motor behavior. One is that alertness and preparation are helpful. If you're getting ready to run a sprint, the thing you need to be attending to is the go signal. So if your body is alert and prepared and ready for action, you're going to attend or receive that information more quickly. Secondly, we have a limited capacity to process information. We can only attend to so much at one time. So when we get overloaded and we're attempting to attend to too many things at once, we're not going to be able to attend to everything. Something's going to slide by. And thirdly, the idea of selective attention. Selective attention is the ability to select and attend to meaningful information while ignoring what's not important. The idea of alertness is that our system is prepared. If we are prepared, our reaction time is going to be faster. Reaction time is the time that elapses from the presentation of a stimulus to the initiation of a response. So if you're sprinting, it's the time from when the gun goes off until the time you start to move. Once you start to move, that's different. You've got to be alert and prepared both physically and psychologically. You have to be attending to the right thing for your reaction time to be short. Reaction time improves with age into the 20s, and it's relatively stable until the 60s when it declines. Now remember, reaction time, the faster you are, the better, so the lower the number of milliseconds. If it takes someone 300 milliseconds to respond, that's better or faster than if it takes them 500 milliseconds to respond. Another idea related to attention is the idea of divided attention. We are limited in our capacity to handle information from the environment. So trying to do more than one thing at a time can be challenging. We divide our attention. That's the same idea as that it's limited. We only have so much. Interference is when one task or one stimulus interferes with us paying attention to something else. So for example, if you are driving and you're talking on the phone and you're listening to the radio and you're trying to read a map and you're unable to do all three of those things successfully, one of the tasks or one of the stimuli is interfering with another, and we only have a limited amount of attention. As people get older, they get better at being able to attend or to switch their attention back and forth from one thing. The idea is not that our brain gets a lot larger or anything when we're an adult, because it doesn't, but we use strategies. Okay, we use strategies to monitor information from the environment. When you first learn to drive, you may be paying attention to a lot of things that really don't matter all that much. Trying to stay inside your lane, for example. When you get a little bit older and you drive, staying inside your lane does not require much attention at all. So you're able to focus on other things. You have more attention freed up. Automation and attention deployment skills are what I just referred to. Automation says that your performance stays stable even with less attention, because we've learned to do a skill automatically. So driving, we learn to stay within the lane automatically. We don't really have to think about it very much or attend to it intentionally. Attention deployment skills are the abilities to, or strategies to, process additional information. We're going to deploy our attention where we know it needs to be. Okay, for example, I know that I really don't need to be paying attention looking for exits when I'm 50 miles from the exit I'm supposed to take. So I can kind of ignore a lot of things in my environment, and I can just attend to the things I need to attend to. Selective attention is related to the idea of divided and limited attention, but selective attention is the ability to attend to relevant information while ignoring irrelevant information. It's known as the cocktail party phenomenon. The idea is that if you're at a party or in any large gathering of people where there's a lot of noise going on, you can focus in on one conversation that you're having and ignore everything else. So you can selectively attend to one set of stimuli while ignoring other stimuli that are present. However, while you're having that conversation and selectively attending to one person's words, if you hear your name in a conversation behind you, you're automatically going to shift and turn at least your ears to listen to what someone had to say about you behind you. So the idea is that all the sounds in the party are still entering your ear, but somehow you're able to filter and just pick up on certain things, and that refers again back to attention deployment skills. So this is known as the cocktail party phenomenon. The development of this ability changes, or we develop this ability as we get older. Kids who are very young, around the ages of 2 to 5, tend to be over-exclusive, meaning they only focus on one thing at a time. They're easily distracted. So if they're doing one thing and then something else comes along and grabs their attention, they'll switch. Okay. Then kids tend to become over-inclusive between ages 6 and 11. They attend to many, many things that are going on in their environment, both things that are relevant and things that are completely irrelevant. By the time a child is around 12 years old, their selective attention ability has developed quite nicely. Selective attention is like visual figure ground discrimination that we talked about when we talked about vision. We're able to selectively attend to something that's in the environment while basically ignoring or separating it from the background environment. Experience and practice when it comes to selective attention is important. Alright, we're going to spend some time talking about memory. Memory is the retention and subsequent retrieval of information. You know what memory is. It's getting something out, remembering it. So there are two types of memory. One is recognition. Recognition is just noticing whether a stimulus is identical or similar to one previously experienced. In other words, recognizing. If I give you a multiple choice test, that is testing your recognition memory. You have to match up the stimulus with the correct thing that matches it. Or if I give you a matching question, that's recognition. But if I ask you an essay question and I just say, tell me all about memory, that's recall. You have to recall the information. The stimulus is not there just to match up or to recognize. It's very important that you study or you practice, keeping in mind whether the test later, both a physical test of a motor skill or a test like you'll take in this class, is going to require that you just recognize the information or that you actually recall it. If you just read over your notes, for example, and you can recognize a definition with a word and you can pair them up, that's great, but that's recognition. That would help you do well on a matching test. For recall, you need to be able to actually come up with a word or the definition yourself. Developmental differences in memory are due primarily to processing strategies rather than structural or capacity increases. Our brain does not get much larger after we're about 6 years old. So it's not that our brain is getting larger or our central nervous system is getting more connections. It's actually getting fewer connections because of pruning and cell death. So the reason our memory improves is because we come up with strategies. This is a little diagram that shows some memory structures. What you have on the left, it's similar to the information processing model. You have external sensory input, so things you hear and see from the environment. You selectively attend to something and send that something, that stimulus, into working memory. Working memory is also known as short-term memory. It's what you're consciously thinking about right now. If you rehearse or do some other type of processing, then that information can move and be stored in long-term memory. To get something out of long-term memory is called retrieval. Okay? So if I say to you, when's your dad's birthday? And then you just thought of it. That information was stored in long-term memory. I gave you a cue to retrieve it. You retrieved it in short-term memory, and then you were able to make a response, a verbal response or just a cognitive response. If I ask you to move, okay, if I say I want you to do a jumping jack, you're going to pull out the plan for jumping jack into working memory and then do a jumping jack. And that would be your motor response. All right, we have several types of memory structures. The first is that first box on the last slide, working memory. It's also known as short-term memory. In general, we remember 7 plus or minus 2 items. And we remember this information for about 30 seconds. However, we can change how much we can remember in several different ways. We can keep rehearsing something over and over and over. So if we're processing it, we're going to hold it in working memory or short-term memory longer. Okay, what I want you to do is get a piece of paper. We're going to do a little memory test. This is an example of a short-term memory test. So do not write anything down while we're doing this until I tell you to. What's going to happen is I'm going to read you aloud a list of words. When I get to the end of the list, I'm going to say write them down, and your job is to write them down, as many of them as you can remember, but they do not have to be in order. Okay, so I'm going to read one, I'm going to say one word approximately every second, and then at the end of that I'm going to say write them down, and you're going to write down as many as you can remember. All right, here we go. Jar, staple, soap, word, lamb, basket, magnet, hanger, trophy, odor, water, jump, video, stuck. Write them down. If you need more time, pause and continue writing. Okay, that's called a memory span test. Let me read back to you the words and you check how many you got right. Here are the words in the order in which I said them. Jar, staple, soap, word, lamb, basket, magnet, hanger, trophy, odor, water, jump, video, stuck. If you remembered anywhere between 5 and 9 items, that's typical or normal for short-term memory. Okay? If you remembered more than that, you may have had some strategy. You may have done what's called chunking. Chunking is where we combine two items into one item so we remember them together. You may have formed a mental picture of maybe odor and water were presented together. Maybe you remembered like a swamp, like stinky water, and just a mental image that was only one item that helped you remember two words, odor and water. All right, let's do another one. This time I'm going to read letters out loud, and when I say stop and write them down, I want you to write them down, but this time I want you to write them down in the order in which I said them. So just listen and write them down in order when I say write them down. Here we go. R, L, J, S, P, K, X, A, W, Q, F, L, I. Write them down. Pause if you need more time. Okay, let me read the letters back to you. R, L, J, S, P, K, X, A, W, Q, F, L, I. There were 13 separate items there. Let's try that again with different letters. I'm going to read them and then I want you to write them down in order when I say write them down. Here we go. T, A, M, U, M, I, T, F, B, I, D, E, A. Write them down. Okay, the letters in order were T-A-M-U, M-I-T, F-B-I, D-E-A. If you realize that I gave you 4 separate acronyms, TAMU for Texas A&M University, MIT for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, FBI for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and DEA for Drug Enforcement Agency. If you had heard of those before and you recognized them when I said them, then what you did is you turned 13 items into 4 chunks, and you were able to chunk together several separate items into one item. All right? For you, because you've practiced it many times, your phone number is just one item. You've got it. It's in long-term memory. You don't remember it as 7 different or 10 different digits. You remember it as just one thing. If someone has a phone number that spells out a word, okay, this is why companies, businesses try to get phone numbers that spell words. A friend of ours used their home phone number was SpyWaxU, S-P-Y-W-A-X-U, SpyWaxU. My husband's old cell phone was AllKim1, A-L-L-K-I-M-1. If you have a company that's a sign company and they're 555 sign, that's a lot easier for people to remember than 7 digits that really don't make any sense. I'll date myself and see if you know what our old phone number was. Our phone number used to be 774 Daryl Johnston, Kevin Smith. Daryl Johnston played for the Cowboys. His number was 48. Kevin Smith played for the Cowboys. His number was 26. So our phone number was 774-4826. That only helps if you have that experience, you have that previous knowledge. Long-term memory is more permanent. It has an unlimited capacity and basically an unlimited duration. You can remember things for not only hours but days and years. We do have, children have memory when they're born. They have early processing abilities, obviously. They have recognition memory shortly after birth. We know this because they show a decreased reaction to a stimulus that they've seen before. That's how we test it. It's called habituation. If they get habituated to something, if they've seen it before and they recognize it, then their reaction is not as great the next time they see it, and the next time they see it, and the next time they see it. Recall, conscious memory, also emerges by 6 months. We can see it, and by 2 years it's really evident because by this time the child can talk and they can tell you something that happened and they can recall something and tell you a story. They can go looking for a toy somewhere that they saw it. They remember how things work, and it's very obvious. They memory is intact. Some other memory abilities that I want to mention, what's called cued recall. If I give you a cue, like if I say, what's the definition of memory? Memory serves as a cue, and then I'm asking you to recall the definition. All right, that is an example of a test question that might be likely for you to have. If there's no cue, then I just give you a piece of paper and say, write down everything you've learned. Okay, in this class, there's really no cue. Contextual learning is where we remember better because we learned something in a certain context, and then we're placed back in that context, and we can retain the information that we learned there. Okay, so we can be talking about the environment. The picture on the right here is of a little baby in a crib with fabric of a certain pattern around it and a little mobile above it. You can see there's a little ribbon that is tied to the baby's foot, and then it's tied to the mobile. So if the baby moves his foot, then the mobile is going to shake, and that's something interesting that the baby would like to watch. So what they did for this experiment is they had 3-month-old babies, and they put them in this environment. They put a little ribbon on their foot, and then they showed the kid, okay, if you move your foot, it makes the mobile move, and so the babies can kick, obviously. They then brought them back the next day and put them in the crib again, and what do? They start kicking, okay? And then what do? The next day they bring them back, they just immediately start kicking because they remember, they're put in the environment, the context helped them have perfect training. This training lasted up to they tested them up to 42 days after they were trained, and they still kicked more when they were placed in the same environment. So when they were put in the same crib that had the same fabric pattern and the same mobile. Another experiment was done with 6-month-old babies, and what they did here is they changed the lining of the crib, and they basically had the same effect. If the lining of the crib is part of the context and it was part of the memory, so if the crib looked the same, the fabric and everything, the response was greater, and if the lining of the crib, the fabric was different, the response was not as great. These infant kicking experiments exhibit evidence for contextual learning. Okay, we can remember things better sometimes because we are placed in the same context. This happens to me in my house all the time. It probably happens to you. You're maybe in your bedroom and you think, oh, I need to get something or do something, and so you walk into the kitchen and then you're like, what am I doing in here? I forgot what I came in here for. So what do? You walk back in the original context, and that helps you remember, oh yeah, I needed to get, whatever it was you needed to get, so that being in that context helps you remember. Memory abilities develop, or short-term memory abilities improve up to early adolescence. The memory span increases from 2 to 7, that should say plus or minus 2 digits by the time a child's about 12 or 13 years old. Coding, searching, and recalling, in other words, strategies, can be difficult for children. They do not automatically, when they're very young, have these strategies to help remember things. Like using acronyms or using little songs or rhymes to help them remember. Teachers, however, know that, and they teach them these strategies. Learning the alphabet to a song helps kids remember it into a rhythm. Something we know that's interesting is that people tend to remember location versus distance. They learn location better than distance. For example, if I were to take your arm and place it on the table or a desk in front of you, if I were to take your hand in a fist on the table in front of you or the desk in front of you and move it to a certain location with your eyes closed and say, okay, I want you to remember that location, and then I pick up your arm and put it back in your lap, and I say, okay, put your arm back in that location, you're going to do that pretty well. Versus if I have your arm on the table and I take your wrist and your arm and I move it, 8 inches, and then I pick up your hand and put it back in your lap. Then I pick up your hand, I put it back on the table in a different place than where I started it last time, and I say, okay, I want you to move your hand the same distance as I just moved it. You're not going to be able to do that as well as you remembered the location, the first example. Okay, our long-term memory abilities also change. Long-term memory exists in infancy, but it's very evident by 2 years old, partly because these kids can now talk, and so it's easier to assess their memory. but they have to be taught rehearsal. They're not great at rehearsal. You have to teach kids how to do that, and they're getting better at retrieval, but that's also an issue. Something that's interesting is continuous versus discrete motor skills. A continuous motor skill is something that doesn't have a definite beginning and a definite end. The end is just an arbitrary point in time. So for example, running. Running is just a continuous motor skill. You just run and run and run, and then you stop whenever. A discrete motor skill is something that has a definite beginning and a definite end. So for example, swinging a bat to hit a baseball. That's a skill. It takes about a second or less, and it has a definite beginning and a definite end. What we know is that we have less loss of long-term memory of continuous skills versus discrete skills. So if someone says, well, once you learn how to ride a bike, you'll always remember how to ride a bike. You may not be as polished as you were when you first learned, but it is true because that's a continuous motor skill. Swimming, once you learn how to swim, you're going to remember how to swim. Right. Knowledge also affects how much we can remember. There's an example is if you take people, let's say children and adults who've never played chess before, and you show them a chessboard with the chess pieces placed on it like if someone stopped playing in the middle of a chess game, and all these pieces were left on the chessboard. Then you take it away out of their sight, and then you give them an empty chessboard with a bunch of pieces, and you ask them to remember where the pieces were. So they're supposed to take the black and the white pieces and put them on the chessboard to match what they had seen previously. What you're going to find is that if the adults and the children have never played chess before, the adults are going to do better. However, if the children have played chess before, they're going to do better because they're going to chunk. Okay, they have knowledge of the game, so when they look at a chessboard that is set up like it was in the middle of an actual game, they're going to remember, oh, see, I don't play chess, so I can't really talk about this very knowledgeably. One guy was about to capture, the guy over here, the queen was about to get taken out or whatever. I don't know anything about chess, so I would be trying to remember each individual piece. I remember, well, there's a little short, black guy over here, and then there was the tall white guy next to him, and on and on. So that's chunking, and they have knowledge of the game, and that helps them be better strategists. They're able to chunk. Something else is meta-memory. Meta-memory is the knowledge or intuition that people have about memory and themselves as memorizers. In other words, we know how we need to memorize things best. We know how we learn. We understand strategies that work for ourselves. This improves with age, and it is approaching being adult-like by about 10 years old. If you study for a test and you think you know all the information, then you might stop studying. Okay, you may or may not be right. You may go in the test and realize, oh my gosh, I didn't know this. But what you're doing is exhibiting your meta-memory, what you know about yourself as a memorizer. Alright, moving on past memory, we're going to talk about processing speed and movement time. Processing speed is simply the rate of speed at which information is processed. There's a large difference here between children and adults. Adults can respond more quickly, process information more quickly, and therefore begin a motor response a lot more quickly than a child can. Successful motor performance depends many times on, first of all, perceptual recognition. We have to recognize what it is in the environment that we need to pay attention to, and once we attend to it, we need to perceive and interpret it correctly. Secondly, we have to pull out of our long-term memory basically the correct movement quickly, so the speed of the memory function. And then thirdly is the neuromuscular response time. How long does it take for us to get the movement going or to get the movement started? And that's reaction time, like I mentioned before. Reaction time is the basic measure of processing speed. Sometimes we can talk about it in terms of the way we would think of a computer. How many bits of information per second are you processing? So reaction time is simply the time that elapses between the presentation of a stimulus and the initiation of a response. So from the time a gun goes off for a sprint until the mover or the runner initiates his movement is the reaction time. Movement time is the time from the beginning of the movement until the completion of the movement. So it does not include reaction time. Alright? If you add together the reaction time plus the movement time, you get what's called response time. So when you go to a track meet and you have people running 100 meters, The time that actually gets reported up on the scoreboard is their response time, because the time begins when the gun goes off and it stops when they finish the movement or they cross the finish line. So from the time the gun goes off until they start moving is reaction time. From the time they start moving until they cross the finish line is movement time. Add those two together and you get response time. In a situation like that, running a 100-meter sprint, there's only one choice. There's only one stimulus that's presented and one action that you're supposed to do. There's no choice. So that's called simple reaction time. It's obviously going to be faster than if you have a choice. If there's more than one stimulus that might be presented, depending on which stimulus is presented, you're going to have to choose a different response. That's called choice reaction time. Our reaction time is going to be slower, or the milliseconds are going to be higher when we report choice reaction time compared to simple reaction time, for a couple reasons. Number one, we have more information being presented to us, so there's a decision to make. That takes time. Secondly, we really can't pre-plan the movement. We can't have it loaded up and ready to go, because we may have to run to the right or the left. If a blue signal means run to the right and a red signal means run to the left, we cannot have already picked what we're going to do. Now, sometimes we do pick how we're going to respond before the stimulus actually gets presented. For example, if you're a goalie in soccer and you have someone shooting a penalty shot against you, you may guess on where they're going to shoot the ball. If you know that 90% of the time they're going to kick to your left, you may just decide, as soon as they kick the ball, I'm going to my left, and hope that you guess correctly. If you wait and actually see where the ball is going, even if you choose the right direction, you might be too slow in getting there because it took time to choose. Okay? So anticipation can be very important. As you see from this graph, reaction time improves throughout childhood. It peaks around age 20, and then it regresses very slowly until age 60. After age 60, we see quite a decline. Actually, the time goes up, as you can see, but remember, the higher the milliseconds reported, the slower the person is moving. So what you see here with the solid line is reaction time, and with the dashed we see movement time, and this is just for an arbitrary movement. It can be really for anything. So not only are we slower in beginning the response, but our overall movement is slower as well. There are a couple ideas related to processing speed and movement time. One is Hicks' law. Hicks' law is the idea that processing time increases as information load or complexity increases reaction time. In other words, the more complex the movement, the slower the reaction time, or the higher the milliseconds. So why does it take longer to plan a complex movement? Okay. For example, reaction time for just pressing a key. Okay, if the stimulus is going to be presented and you're just supposed to press a key, that's very simple. But if when the stimulus is presented, you're supposed to jump up, hit a tennis ball that's hanging from the wall, then jump down and press 3 keys in a certain sequence, that's much more complex. The second law related to processing speed and movement time is Fitts' law. It's also known as the speed-accuracy trade-off. The idea in general is that when performers attempt to do something more quickly, they typically do it less accurately. For example, if you are learning to type and accuracy is very, very important and you don't want to have to backspace or delete or correct your errors, you're going to go more slowly. Now that we have word processing, and most of you have probably never typed on a typewriter, that's not all that important. But if you were typing on a typewriter and you didn't have any corrector ribbon or corrector fluid, you would go very, very slowly if accuracy is extremely important. If you try to go extremely fast on something like typing, you're more likely to make more errors. Programming is the idea, or the definition of programming is the cognitive processing that results in the formulation of a thought, a cognitive expression, or a motor program. A plan for movement is what we are most concerned with, or the words in red. One of the most known and well-traditional theories related to memory, specifically motor programs, is what's known as schema theory, formulated by Dick Smith around 1975. The idea of schema theory is that we have motor programs stored in our memory, and that these motor programs are not specific records of the movements to be performed. In other words, every time we do a movement, it's a little bit different. If you're talking about catching a chest pass in basketball. Every single time you catch that ball, it's a little bit different than it was before. Even if the ball is coming just a fraction of a mile per hour faster or slower, if it's a millimeter higher or lower to the right or to the left, it's coming from a further distance. Something about that movement is different. So our brain does not store, according to schema theory, every single instance of every movement we've ever done. That would take up a lot of memory. Instead, the idea of schema theory is that there is a set of general rules, concepts, and relationships, or schemas, to guide performance, which is in keeping with the concept of a GMP, or a generalized motor program. For example, instead of recording every time we throw a baseball to a target, what we record is the relationships between different constructs related to an overarm throw. So we may have a generalized motor program for a wide range of movements that all fall under the category of overhand throwing. We could then apply rules about overhand throwing to an overhand throw that's with a baseball to a target 20 feet away, 20 yards away, that's throwing to the right, to the left, that's throwing into the wind or with the wind at your back, etc. Intuitively, this seems to make sense. The term motor schema refers to the storage of movement elements and the relationship of these elements together. The idea of schema is that we change experiences into a cognitive form that can be used later in addressing a new situation. Part of schema theory is also the recall schema, which is the relationship between the response specifications and the actual outcome. So to produce a new response, a movement that you've never done before, what you would enter, if you're thinking of it like a computer program, if you enter in the initial conditions. All right, what are the initial conditions? Well, how far away from my target am I if I'm talking about throwing? And you also enter in the desired outcome. Where do I want the ball to land? I want the ball to hit that target 5 feet off the ground at a speed of 30 miles per hour. You plug those in, and then what you get is the response specifications, which tells you exactly how to specify the response. Okay, at what point do I need to release? How far back does my arm need to come in the wind-up? Where's my, how far do I go with my follow-through? How much force do I need to put behind the throw, or how much power? The recognition schema is the relationship between the sensory consequences and the actual outcome. So a person designates a desired outcome and then predicts the expected consequences of the response. Okay, this all sounds, kind of crazy, but if you think about it, it makes sense. In order to produce a new movement, a movement you've never done before, you basically plug in the initial conditions and the desired outcome, and then you get the response specifications. So even if I've never thrown a wad of paper into a trash can that's exactly 7 feet away and 2 feet off the ground before, I've learned enough about overhand throwing that I'm going to be able to do it. It may not be perfect, but I know that I'm going to have to throw and apply a certain amount of force and aim to a certain place because I've done a lot of overhand throwing before, and I have a general rule or a general schema for overhand throwing. This idea suggests that variability in practice is very important. So if you're going to teach someone to, shoot a bow, archery, okay, you're not going to just have them stand in one place and shoot straight ahead at a target that's 20 feet away over and over and over and over again. You're going to have them shoot from a variety of positions, distances. They're going to have them shoot to the right and to the left at a high target, a low target, a stationary target. You may have them shoot down on one knee, down on both knees, maybe lying down. The idea is that this is going to promote general motor performance. If you go hunting, you're not going to be able to shoot at your target, a deer or a bird or whatever, from exactly the same spot every single time. In fact, when you shoot at a deer, you're probably going to be aiming in a way that you have never aimed exactly that way before. The distance, the angle, the moving target. So you need to have an important thing to remember is that our brain and our body are not pre-wired for skilled movements. Rather, they have self-organizing properties that adjust for biological and environmental context or affordances. Remember in chapters 1, 2, and 3, we talked about the central nervous system being basically wired up during infancy and early childhood. Infants learn to move. It's one of the most amazing things that they learn how to do these movements, like creeping and crawling and walking. How they acquire new movement skills is very interesting. First of all, they have to couple or pair up perception and action. They have to perceive things in their environment and then figure out how they're going to act on them. They also are going to develop movement synergies. In other words, they're going to learn for their muscles to act together, to formulate a plan or a program for movement where there's going to be cooperation between different muscles. Crawling isn't just the legs, and it's not just the arms, and it's not just the right and not just the left. The way the brain gives the instructions to the arms and the legs is for them to work together. Kids develop these movement synergies by exploring their environment. There's a time when a child or an infant is going to switch from one movement pattern to another. So for example, an infant who drags itself around on his belly, using his arms, he's doing kind of a low army crawl, is going to switch eventually to where they're creeping. Creeping is where they're moving on their hands and their knees with their trunk off the ground. Okay, so there's going to be the shift from one type of movement to another is called a phase shift, and this is where a new movement pattern is explored and selected. An amazing example are these twins. You may have seen documentaries on them for TV before. These are two girls who are obviously conjoined twins. They have two central nervous systems, but between the two of them, they share one pair of arms and one pair of legs. However, Brittany is the left, on the left side, controlling the limbs on the right, and Abigail is on the right, controlling the limbs on the left. So basically you have two central nervous systems that are combined in the periphery, okay? And they have amazingly learned to do very skilled movements that doctors predicted they would never be able to do. They learned to walk when they were only 15 months old. They also bike, they swim, they play volleyball. Due to the nature of their conjoined, the way they are joined together, they obviously cannot be separated. But they are a great example of how our central nervous system is self-organizing and incredibly dynamic and plastic.